So I now want to work on computing the student's GPA. So here's an example of an input. So the sample input is student scores like this. And what I need to do is compute the GPA. That means I need to compute num2 GPA of this, the grade point value of this, the grade point value of this, grade point value of this, and then average. So manually, if I were to try to compute the GPA for this specific student, I would do num2 GP 98 plus num2 GP of 90 plus num2 GP of 85, and then I'll just divide by 3, and that is the GPA of this particular student. Okay, so what I need to do, I need to somehow compute the grade point values of each of those things. So that's exactly what sapply does, right? So sapply can compute the grade point value here, grade point value here, grade point value here. So I'll say sapply, and I'll say x is, so here I'm just working with student scores. I'll transfer it to a function in a second. So I'll say that's going to be score. So I have this vector, 98, 90, 85, and I'll say my function is num2gp. So if I run this, what I get is num2gp of 98, num2gp of 90, num2gp of 85. So now all I need to do is I need to compute the mean of those. If I have this, I can just say mean of this, and that is all it takes. So all that's left to do is to put this into a function. So the function is supposed to take in a data frame that's like student scores, so it'll have a course column and a score column, and it should return a number like, for example, 3.56. So this is student.gpa, let's say function, and I'll call this scores. And all that I need to do now is I need to make sure that I'm using a matching variable name here. So I chose to name this input scores. So now I'll use scores in here, and I'll compute the GPA. So how am I going to use this? So I'm just going to say student.gpa student.scores. Okay, so what happens when I run this? So I'll read the function in. So what happens when I run this is the first thing is student scores gets assigned to scores. So inside of the function, scores is this data frame. Then I'm saying take scores $scores. So in order to compute that, I'll first assign student scores to score. So here I'm kind of manually doing what R would do automatically when I call the function, right? So student scores gets sent to scores, so I manually set scores to student scores. So now I can check that student scores $score is this, and now sapply does num2gp of the first element, num2gp of the second element, num2gp of the third element. That gets me the grade point values like this, and now I can compute the average of those. That's 3.56. Okay, so, and that works here as well. So that is one solution here.